Coming up, the New York Football Giants have had all eyes on the combine. Who impressed from the linebackers to the edge rushers? But more importantly, what's going on with Saquon Barkley? What dollars is it going to cost to keep him? And is Joe Shane and Brian Dable building a culture that players want to be a part of? We dive in coming up next. Yes, my friends, it's OGP, the One Giant Podcast, where you know that we are your hosts. Over here, Adam Armbrecht. Over there, Andrew Makowitz. And we have nothing short of a laundry list of things to cover here, Andy. First and foremost, starting with the Combine, which yours truly invested way too much time and energy into yesterday.
You know, I'm proud of you, Adam. I am really proud of you for doing the work, doing the homework, informing the OGP listeners exactly who the Giants should target, who they should shy away from. I know you have a specific breakdown. You charted things like you were keeping a box score at a baseball game. Like, I think that's pretty impressive. So kudos to you, my friend. I watched a little bit of it. I was in and out. I have a few key takeaways, but clearly we're going to lean on you for all the analysis. Break it down for me.
Listen. This is the good. So what I like about doing this thing is I just think it's fun. For whatever reason, I like stat tracking, I like notating, and I like the idea of, I said this last episode, about trying to go through, you watch guys in drills. I do not watch the college game a ton during the season. Some of the high profile matchups, sure, I'll go and take a look at those on the weekend. But I have other, between everything else going on with the other sports that I cover, I don't have time. So when I get into this, like, I kind of go in blind where, hey, this player looks good to me. And then I go and I see that he's projected to go undrafted. And I think, interesting. Maybe my eye is not as detailed as it is, but watching for players like that is a lot of fun. So if you were over on onegiantpodcast.com and you read the article on some of the players that I was talking about, you would have turned around. And we'll start inside the linebacker room because that's the exciting position for the Giants, I think, out of this group. Edge rusher obviously also matters there as well. But you would have seen me do a write-up on Edgerrin Cooper, Texas A&M linebacker product. And guess what? He was well-regarded. He was high-ranked. He's anywhere from the back end of the first round all the way through to the middle of the second. I assume he's going to rise because guess what? When you start tracking these stats, you start writing them down. A 4.47 40 is exactly what's going to open your eyes up here if you're the New York Football Giants.
4.4. I mean, that is just so fast.
I'm more of a 4.45 guy, but I was impressed by his effort. Yeah.
Yeah. It depends what shoes you're wearing, like how much stretching you've had. I totally get
resistance.
it. Yeah. I mean, this is the funny part of it. And this is why we talked about like what your takeaways are from the combine, because some of these numbers are eye popping, right? Some of the speed, some of the athleticism, some of the wingspan numbers for some of these players. You're like, holy smokes. Like, I did not expect to see that. And that's really kind of what informs you of some of these players that maybe, second or third round, all of a sudden start moving up the board pretty effectively. I mean, Adam, when you were looking at this, did you have it through the lens of who the Giants should want? Or were you looking at it more like, is this going to be a player that's going to move up the draft board for whatever team takes him?
Yeah, I try to do it just as like, where are these guys going to go, right? Is their stock going to rise or is they going to fall? I run through and do it as, is their stock up? Is it down? Is it neutral? And the only reason why, at least at this point, I think it's not, you don't have to worry about, is it a good player for the Giants? Well, that'll matter depending on where the Giants draft and where these guys go. But if these players rise over the next 3 more days here through the weekend, you start to get a sense of positional value, which means that somebody's going to maybe be available that you wouldn't expect for the Giants. So I try to not be locked into the idea of, well, the Giants need this player at this position, and that's why you go for them. And interestingly enough, with the linebacker spot, because I know you have a couple of guys that you kept your eye on, and obviously there was some high-level stuff that came out of the combine on the first day. When you looked at the linebacker room, it's insane. So I went through and just keep track of like where they're projected to go overall. From a pure linebacker standpoint, taking out the bulk of the edge rushers, though a few of them mixed into that last group, it's a talented group. The baseline feels pretty high, but inside of this entire group, there was only 6 players out of over 30 that are projected to go somewhere in the top 60 of the draft. So I found it alarming to watch these players, hear everybody from the combine, Rich Eisen and all the guys say, wow, this is a really talented class of linebackers. But when you go look at most outlets, I like to use NFL Draft Buzz, if you're not taking a dude in the top 70, then from a value perspective, the way they're projected, you're missing out on the linebacker room. So Giants specific, if you want to add to that core, in theory, this needs to be top 4 picks, top 70. Obviously, you have that pick there in the 3rd round if you want to get a guaranteed pedigree that seems to track from college going to the pros.
Yeah, that is surprising, but that's also kind of the way the combine works. Is like you're watching a lot of guys that are trying to vault up the draft board, not necessarily the guys that are sitting there in the top 5, 7, 10. And also, Adam,
Sure.
like there's only so many of those guys, and there's only a handful of picks that those people can make. Like you have to think about the entirety of your draft and say, to your point, who we have multiple 2nd round picks. Who are we going to be targeting? Are there players we need to move up to be able to get if we still want them? So it is interesting, and that's why the combine is fascinating to me. I try to take it with a grain of salt, but then you see a guy run like a crazy 40 and you're like, I think he would look good on the New York Giants.
Yeah, the idea of it, I want to get to, because you mentioned one player that you had kept your eye on, but 40 times best. Now we said 4.47 for Cooper there. Obviously, that was impressive. So there's two things I want to mention here before we turn our attention. We'll round back into this on the back end of the episode because there's a lot of meat on this bone. Peyton Wilson, who had a lot of injuries at the college level, North Carolina State, he comes out, he runs a 4.440, best of the combine on day 1, and then comes out and runs it again because he's trying to showcase that he's healthy and he's ready to play. Runs a 4.49, incredibly impressive. Again, he's 53rd overall on NFL Draft Buzz. I assume if you take the injuries away, athleticism and talent is going to move him up the board there. But here's the one that I'll bookend it with before you talk about your guy. Kalen DeLoach out of Florida State, who is an undrafted free agent. That's what he grades out to be. But he shows up and runs a 4.45 and then a 4.47 40 time. And to go through and watch the drills, while he is a bit undersized, while he's not, he's not necessarily going to be the most fluid in the hips, getting in and out of breaks, taking running backs or tight ends out of the backfield. Okay. But he was projected to go near closer to a 4.65, 4.7 40 time. When you make that type of leap in that one measurable, guess what? Like right, wrong, indifferent. And I sometimes I do think it's a little bit insane. But it's like, oh, hold on, 4.47 looks like you are a 6th round linebacker now. And that's something really impressive and exciting for young players like this, and maybe for the Giants or any team to look at some of these deep round values.
Well, and that's the thing, Adam. We talked about it before. It's like when you post one of those numbers, they know what the ceiling can be, right? Like
Right.
if you post a 4.8 and they're like, oh man, that's not going to translate. Every coach looks at it and says, if you give me all the measurables, I will coach the player into whatever he can be, because we can't teach speed necessarily. Like that's as fast as he's going to be. And so I do find that a little bit fascinating. You mentioned to me like what stood out for me in some of the different drills.
Yeah.
I kind of looked at it like there was a lot of defensive tackles that Braden Fisk stole the show with his and his athleticism. Don't really know if the Giants need a defensive tackle at this point, considering we have Dexter Lawrence. What I thought was fascinating is looking at 2 edge rushers, knowing the Giants really are in the market for one with the lackluster performance and injury history of Azeez Ojulari. The 2 that I was looking at was Chop Robinson from Penn State and Dallas Turner from Alabama. They both technically stood out, but I found it really fascinating. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the numbers without going crazy. So Chop Robinson ran a 4.48 at 254 pounds. Like that is pretty crazy when you think about how much speed he has. We talk about like, well, where does he stack up? A lot of people are saying like he was a 2nd round talent, kind of creeping into the back end of the 1st round now. And then you look at a guy like Dallas Turner, right? He ran a 4.46 40, had a 40.5-inch vertical leap at 247. He is like a freak athlete. And you may say like, okay, so like looks like either or would work. But then you start looking at the measurables, Adam. And when you look at Dallas Turner, he's got an 83-inch wingspan. And you're like, okay, well, how does that compare to Chop Robinson? They're about the same size, run the same type of 40. Chop Robinson has a 76 wingspan. So you're talking about 7 or 8 inches. And like, you may say like, is that a big deal? When you're talking about these massive 6'8" offensive linemen trying to get a hold of you, like 6, 7, 8 inches of being able to extend your arm to tip passes or get around the defense is something that these coaches look at and say, it's the difference why Dallas Turner might be creeping into the top 10. And the reason why Chop Robinson showed up pretty well and is still sitting there at the back end of the 1st round.
Yeah, and you're talking about two players because Dallas Turner, excuse me. I had made the note of him when talking about the linebackers because just from a grouping standpoint at the combine, Dallas Turner ran with primarily the linebackers, the off-ball linebacker group, which makes the wingspan actually that much more impressive from both aspects of it. Hey, with this type of speed, if I can play in coverage a little bit, if I can use my length to track down running backs on the running plays defensively as well, but I have kind of the all traits that you want from a Giant standpoint to be able to do a lot of things effectively. Chop Robinson, dude, when you watch his physical presence, the quads, as I think they used as the reference there, because of course Saquon Barkley, fellow alum, it was like these guys are built a certain way. The reach is not there, but you expect him to be a more powerful player, and that's the difference here too. When you look at these linebackers, just as the one note, if you're running, you want to see a 4.62. That's like off-ball linebacker. That's the average speed. So when you see a guy doing 4.47, when you see a fringe top 10 talent, all of a sudden you say, like you mentioned about back end of the draft or guys near the first round, hey, all the measurables are there. And that means that I take them from being a top 20 to being an elite talent if I believe in my coaching. I take them from sitting there at 10, 12, whatever, and I say, does he get into the the top 10? And we will, because we have to talk about Saquon Barkley here, come back around on this and explain why it really matters to the New York Football Giants. Close out if you got one more.
Last note, I just wanted to talk about the big difference. Dallas Turner is the type of player that I'm looking at if the Giants decide to trade back from 6. We talk about, like, are the Giants locked into a QB wide receiver at, in the first round? I think if they can extract some value out of the 6th pick, maybe one of those quarterbacks falls and Joe Shane isn't enamored with him. Dallas Turner is the type of guy that is a difference maker, and it also shows up not only at the combine for him. He had 10 sacks last season, Adam, for Alabama. Chop Robinson in his last 2 years had 9.5 sacks. So when you look at the difference, it's like, okay, is the tape and the production matching the physical attributes we see at the combine? For Chop Robinson, it's a little bit of a mixed bag where he's a little bit undersized. He had a little bit of middling production at Penn State, but then he runs this 40, and all of a sudden everyone's like, wow. Whereas Dallas Turner's like, okay, he looked like the type of guy at Alabama that could flourish. He has the size, he has the speed. Like, it all lines up to me. Oh man, if the Giants trade back to like 10 and they can get an edge rusher like that and accumulate a lot of draft talent, like, that's something I would be interested in.
We'll round back into that note on the back end of the draft. But first, we need to take care of a potential in-house, possibly going out-of-house player in one Saquon Barkley. Before we do that, we remind you, for all these young players at the Combine, for the coaches, the GMs, everybody in the NFL, they need to get over to pietential.com, Pietential. Why? Because it is an online assessment tool that helps you set benchmarks for your well-being, gives you tools to improve yourself, and also tracks your progress over time. It's 100% for free individuals, 100% free for individuals, and you get over there and make sure that you're mentally aligning yourself with your physical well-being. Pietential, Pietential.com. Barkley.com would have a story right now, potentially about Charles and his former NBA playing career, or about the New York Football Giant running back. This one is fun. Josina Anderson. We're going to start with that, and then I'm going to give you some contract quote projections that are flying around that I think tell a very different story here. Give us Josina Anderson's comments on this, because everybody read this and everybody basically went, "What?" Not like whether you agree with the sentiment, legitimately like, I don't know what is being said.
Okay, so Adam, listen, sometimes the internet gets things wrong and it's very, very divisive, and people are like,
Yes.
why am I on this thing? And then something happens like what happened yesterday, and it was unanimous. Like, if you put up a poll, people would have said 99.999% of people would have said, what on earth is happening right now?
It's about
And so
community, right?
I
The
I,
internet's
I
about it's
don't
about community and coming together.
I don't yeah, it was basically community noted in the comments, like, what are we talking about here? I want to say the exact quote so that
Yeah.
no one thinks I'm like paraphrasing or doing something different. So Josina Anderson tweeted out yesterday, I'm told the Giants and Saquon Barkley's representatives had a quote unquote good initial meeting on Wednesday at the scouting combine per source.
Mhm.
My understanding is the team remains open to multiple options,
Mhm.
including
Mhm.
memorializing Barkley's potential legacy as a New York Giant pending an agreement on mutual terms.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
So that last sentence is like, if I could be more confused, I don't know. It felt like a Mad Libs, didn't it? It was like
Because
memorializing Barkley's potential legacy pending an agreement on future terms. Like,
but
Adam, what is your initial reaction, and what do you think this actually means?
well, here's my problem. Okay, so everyone agreed. Everyone agreed with the WTF, Josina. What are we even saying here, right? That was the first part. But the second part of it, where I think people maybe started going in all different directions, was it was legacy. What legacy? A lot of people were pulling on that, right? Okay, he's a great player, but what has he accomplished? He hasn't won Super Bowls here. He hasn't even been a top X running back over the last 5 years based on stats. All that. That's not what mattered to me. Memorialize. I think like because that to me, like it was like, well, that is the culmination, the conclusion of that is the thoughtful note you make at the gravesite of a loved one after they have passed on. So that was the thing that I didn't understand. They go through multiple outlets. Like to me, it was like memorializing it by saying, we love and appreciate Saquon Barkley and everything that he was for this organization over the last 5 years. However, it seems like people maybe lost the thread here that Josina Anderson, who wants to manipulate things from a player perspective, and I don't mean that negatively. I mean, that's what players need, voices that represent them in the media. But it just seemed like whatever her intent was, it came across to me like the Giants were saying, yeah, I mean, we would pay you if the price was low enough. And if not, we'd like to give you a really nice send off when you leave. Like that was as far as I could get in this Mad Lib.
Okay, so I'm close to where you are, but I read it differently.
Okay.
One, I read this as in like Saquon Barkley's agent handed over a couple of key words that he wanted to make sure Josina Anderson tweeted out. Like,
Just went, okay, I can work those in here, no problem.
all right, legacy, uh, uh, potential, and memorializing like it's some grandiose thing. But Adam, what on top of that, what I got out of this was the last like 5 or 6 words was the most interesting. Pending an agreement on mutual terms. It's like, yeah, isn't that what a contract negotiation is?
Well, that too. Yeah.
Well, I'm told that they would love to like put a statue of Saquon Barkley out front of MetLife Stadium, pending the two coming to an agreement together on mutual terms, which they haven't been able to do for the last 2 years. You're like, hey, what planet are we on? And like, obviously, what I think she was trying to say was they're trying to get close to a deal that allows Saquon Barkley to potentially be a Giant for life and actually complete a legacy of one of the all-time greats to have him eventually in the ring of honor with some of the other Giant greats. If that's what was said, you're like, oh, I totally get it. The memorializing his potential legacy. How are you memorializing a potential legacy? It's like, no, you're trying to lock in a long-term deal so that he's once a Giant, always a Giant. Like that's the way that I thought about it. But man, did we bend over backwards to get there?
And also, the reason why too is the last line there is you said pending being able to come to an agreement. It undercuts the whole thing. It takes everything. Of course.
Yes.
Andy and I would love to be the king of the mountain, living at the top of the world, ruling over our subjects, pending the ability to raise an army and successfully negotiate a peaceful transition of. You're like, it's just insane. Like you can set any goal you want and then say, pending that we come to terms. Of course, pending you come to terms. It's the entire thing that's gone on since last year. Since last offseason, it's been, we're going to go ahead and franchise tag you. Why? Because we can't come to terms on a deal. We can't agree on what market value is for you. Or even if we agree on what market value is, we can't agree that we even want to pay you that. Like, that's the part of it to me that you could all take away in agreement is that it's like, yes, if we can come to terms. Of course.
Okay. So I'm going to say one more thing, and then I want you to talk about like what that mutual term would look like. But Adam, imagine I went to my employer and I was like, I would like to memorialize my legacy here at this organization. And like it obviously, like pending an agreement on mutual terms between us, I want to memorialize my legacy here.
Of course you do.
I need $5 million a year to be able to do it. But like that's how I want to move. I really want to memorialize this legacy. Do you know how silly that would sound? Do you know how silly that is in the real world? Like that's why I find this even more funny. Is like this doesn't equate to like us like regular average Joes like in our jobs memorializing a potential legacy. Just chef's kiss. But if we are going to memorialize Barkley's
Sure.
potential legacy, Adam, and agree on potential pending, possible,
Mutual
maybe
terms.
mutual terms, what are we thinking now? The latest is on like where we think the contract would actually land.
I just like the man. I'm going to memorialize the heck out of this thing, and that's why I'm really going to need a big contract to keep me here. Yeah. So this is the other part of this problem here, and not even a problem. It's just it's a crystallizing of where things currently stand for the running back market for Saquon Barkley specifically, and why it really is a wait and see as dominoes start to fall. Because within the last week, pretty much all of these outlets have come out with these figures. So this isn't from 3 months ago. It's not from last year because I found ones from a year ago and I obviously could not pull those into this narrative. Bleacher Report, 3 for 27 million projected contract for Saquon Barkley. Pro Football Focus, 3 for 36.8 million with 20 million guaranteed. Spot Track projected market value, not projected contract, 3 for 29.9 million. The 33rd football team, they come with 3 for 42. The caveat being second franchise tag or a long-term deal like the 3 for 42, similar to the Taylor contract with the Colts from last season. That range is so sprawling and so far apart that nobody really knows. Nobody knows a couple of things. What is going to happen on this free agent market with the other running backs? Is anyone going to set a benchmark here? You'll talk about that in a second. And then also, I think it's representative of where you think this player is going to go. Because when you get into this is why I think that the 33rd team numbers were odd to me, because it was one of two things. They said the Giants will tag him or they will give him the long-term deal at over $40 million. Those two things I don't think can live in the same world. There is a world where Saquon Barkley earns $40 million, but that's when I think we're talking about other teams coming to the market and wanting to make a big splash.
Yeah, it is wild. It's like anywhere from 9 million to, I don't know, 14 or 15 million. You're like, that's a big gap. Like that is not, oh, it's 10 to 12 million. 9 to 14 or 15 million is a huge gap. And it shows that no one really knows what these GMs are thinking about. Like, was last year an aberration? Are we going to build upon it? What I care about most is the guaranteed money, figuring out exactly what that looks like. I think everyone agrees it's probably a 4-year, a 3-year deal. A 4-year seems highly ambitious for both sides to be able to look at. But
Mhm.
Adam, I respect the fact that Bleacher Report and all of these other ones have their different projections. What I think is going to inform everything is Josh Jacobs of the Las Vegas Raiders is in a very similar situation where he was franchise tag last year. He is now hitting the free agent market. He potentially would like to stay with his team, and he
Mhm.
already started active negotiations in order to stay. Now, Pro Football Focus has said the projected contract for Jacobs would be 3 years, $34.5 million with 21.3 million guaranteed. The first is, if the Giants were to slide that offer across the table, would you want them to slide that offer? And would Saquon Barkley take that offer?
What was that? So 23 million guaranteed, and what was the total dollar?
21.3 million guaranteed and
Uh-huh.
$34.5 million over a 3-year deal.
I mean, again, yeah, like this is actually the weird. It's good that you bring up this contract because here's the weird part. That sounds fine. Like it sounds fine to me. I like Saquon. Like, one of the things that always gets lost in this, it's the idea that I think that Saquon Barkley is not worth it or that he's going to fall off a cliff this upcoming season. I think injuries are a big factor, but effectively the life cycle being a little north of $20 million. And if it doesn't work out after 2 years, you're all set and whatever. Great. Thanks so much. Like that's great. I love the contract, but I just don't think that Saquon Barkley cares about what the market says where his value should be. Like if Jacobs sets this kind of benchmark here, I think that Barkley will look at it and go, I'm way better than him. I deserve more than that. And I think that there will be teams that will say, you're way better than him. And also, we have kind of the extra cash here, right? The New York Football Giants $1 to, let's say, the Houston Texans is only worth like the Giants have 30 cents on the dollar compared to Houston. So and that matters in this, right? The Giants say, "Hey, we're going to give you that deal. 22 million, 35 total. There's the guaranteed dollars." And Houston goes, "Great. We'll give you 30 million guaranteed and we'll give you $45 million contract." It doesn't matter to us. It's all relative. So I mean, do you perceive that the same? And does that number that you put out there, does that feel fair? And how do you perceive Jacobs as well relative to Barkley? Because I think that there's been a perceptual divide about that. And I truly wonder at the end of the day, production is what matters in this league. And Jacobs has been a productive back. And I think we, at least inside the Giants bubble, still hold up this perception of, well, Saquon Barkley is so far and above a better player than Jacobs. Is it like he's better, but is he that much better that there should be this type of gap when we talk about what these players are going to get paid?
Listen, Josh Jacobs has been a productive player. He's had 3 1,000-yard seasons. 2022 was his breakout year where he had 1,600 yards, 4.9 yards per carry. But he had 3.5 yards per carry last season. In 2021, he had 4 yards per carry. In 2020, he was 3.9. So, when you look at Josh Jacobs, you're like, was that 1 year the aberration? Or, is that production what we can expect from him? It's a difficult kind of thing for them to answer. Yes, Saquon Barkley is a better running back than Josh Jacobs, in my opinion. $11.5 million for Saquon Barkley on a multi-year deal, basically guaranteeing him 2 years. Yeah, I'm with you. I'm like, that's totally fair. I'd sign up for it. I'd be surprised if Joe Shane wouldn't sign up for that. But Saquon may say, I'm worth more. And really the question comes into it, Adam. How much does Saquon really want to be here? How much is the allure and the pull of being in New York and being with the Giants? Because if some other team offers him $13.5 million and the Giants offer him $11.75 million, the question is, how much do you want to stay here? You went to Penn State. You're a guy from the Northeast. Is $1 million a year enough for you to move everything across the country and go live in Houston? I don't know, but it's going to come to a head. I am confident that another team will offer him more money than the Giants. And really the question is, how much is the delta and what's the breaking point where Saquon either feels disrespected or he's like, it's time to move on?
Yeah, and I think it does matter. And guess what? If you're talking about a team like Houston, remember taxes are a little bit different there as well. Like that matters. It should matter when you talk about these things too. There's post-playing career. There's all of this stuff. I think my concern on this, and then I want to turn it back to the draft and this combine just to close out. My concern on this is that if Saquon is also thinking about his post-playing career, it means to whatever percentage, he's not thinking about his playing career. Like, I know that can seem silly. We've seen Michael Strahan, right? He started doing this the last decade of his career. He was basically like, going into media, baby. Like, watch me go, and was still incredible. But he's a running back. There are injuries here. And I'll tell you right now, like, we haven't really talked about this part of it. Saquon Barkley, knock on wood, want him to be healthy for every last game that he plays. He could sign a multi-year contract, 3-year deal with the Giants or another team and get hurt this training camp. Like, it's just a reality of what his career has been to this point. And I don't think that if you're the Giants specifically, you can afford to take that kind of risk. Other teams can absorb it and have it not work out for them. If it doesn't work out for the Giants, they've allocated money to the position. They're not going to address it in another way, form or fashion. And all of a sudden you walk into the season and guess what? For all that Mel Kiper may think that Daniel Jones is better than 80% of the quarterbacks coming out in this year's draft class, you're going to end up being in a strikingly similar position that you were a year ago. Let's actually do something different. I mentioned Mel Kiper there. So when we talk about this draft, there's one note that I wanted to make here about Caleb Williams that came out late yesterday that I find interesting and it is going to inform this. So Caleb Williams apparently declined medical examinations with teams at the combine and did not sign off on having his medical record shared with teams. He's believed to be the first combine invite to decline examinations per CBS. How alarming is that if you're at the top of the draft here? And if you're the New York Football Giants, just watching this board unfold here before I have one note about the combine as we move into day number 2 here on Friday.
I've gone back and forth on this because I'm like, if you're the number 1 pick and you're going to be the number 1 pick, like, why on earth would you give anyone anything or do anything? Like, I wouldn't even show up at the combine. I'd be like at my house, training in my backyard, like making sure no one sees me until I walk across that stage and I get 25 million guaranteed. Like, that's how I would.
If you're not there, then it doesn't matter, right? It's only because you're there to decline it that maybe feels like it's a problem.
Right. It really, I don't know. If he's very confident that he's going number 1, I would do the same thing. Now, the question is, like, if you don't have any injuries of substance, then you just hand it over and you don't really care. So now it opens up Pandora's box for speculation of like, well, has he missed games before? Is there something with his shoulder? What happened to his knee? And now all of a sudden it's like, you bring all this fodder in where we're like, it brings more questions than answers. But really, he's betting on the fact that I'm going to go number one and I don't need to do anything. Do you think that this has the potential that if someone thought that Jaden Daniels was near Caleb Williams or Drake May, that like the Bears would actually pass on drafting him?
I don't know. I don't think. I mean, listen. I think if you're in, you're in. And by the way, who knows? Maybe the Bears are like, dude, we're taking you number one overall. You don't have to show anybody anything, right? Like maybe they don't care either, right? Now the interesting thing to me would be if the Bears, we don't think this is the case, but if the Bears were having an internal conversation, is Caleb Williams really the pure 100% guaranteed lock at number one, or there's May, or there's Daniels, right? Like, could these things matter? And this maybe is what's interesting about if you're one of these other quarterbacks there at the top of the draft, you go, maybe I should throw at the combine. Like if this opened a door for you where you go, how close am I to maybe being able to challenge for the number one overall pick? Obviously, their agents and everybody else are going to say, calm down, buddy. Like it's not going to happen, right? This isn't going to be our year for that. But that would be the interesting part to me. Like I know that it seems like the Bears are trying to put up every smoke signal to be like, now, if you wanted to give me every pick you have from here until 2075, maybe we would. Right? They'd love to just at least get the market up for it. But all perceptions are that they're going to stay there at one. They're going to take Caleb Williams, and we're going to roll on from there. Go ahead before I want to hit
No, the last thing I was going to say is this is a trend that started after CJ Stroud took the cognitive test last year, and it said like he didn't perform very well, and then it was like what does this test actually show? And it's ridiculous. And then all the players this year were like, nope, not taking the cognitive test. It doesn't really benefit me at all. I'm curious if this is the start of a trend where Caleb Williams knows and he's confident that he's going to go at the top,
Yeah.
where people actually start declining the medical piece of it, which to me, the cognitive thing is kind of ridiculous. The medical thing is a real issue where it's like you are a professional athlete. Like if you have some serious concerns about your knee where like one hit may end your playing career, like we need to know that before we're going to invest big money in everything.
The exam at the combine is one thing, but declining to provide your records in terms of what's gone on at the college level for you, that does raise an eyebrow here. So I'm sure a team like the Bears are going to, like, at least behind closed doors, be like, we have to have some conversation here to know, like, and by the way, it's not often that you go, I don't want to show you. And it's a really good thing, right? Like,
Yeah.
I don't want to show you my report card, Mom. Why? Because the straight A's, it'll blind you when you see how good I did across the board, as opposed to, well, there's a little F in there. It's a minor situation, but it turns out I can't read. Bottom line is, we'll see how that plays itself out. The other quick thing that I want to mention here, going back to the top, we talk about these linebackers. We talk about players that are maybe trying to go from top 12 to 15 into that top 10 room. There's a couple of factors here. You mentioned trading back for the New York Football Giants. That's true. And one of the ways that it might work out, as on day two, it's going to be cornerbacks at the combine. It's also going to be tight end. So we know we have one big tight end there at the top of the draft. But what if some of these defensive players that we've highlighted move into a space where Odunze is no longer 8, 9, 10? He's 11, 12, 13. Now, if he has a great combine, it probably won't change much. But that trade down scenario could become more enticing for the Giants, even less about getting an edge rusher, getting a linebacker, saying, we want to get the wide receiver. But if we perceive, and this is always the big question, right, that these second and third wide receivers at the top of this draft class, knowing that Marvin Harrison Jr. will almost assuredly not be there, if we think they're marginal, then all of a sudden we take, Neighbors and Odunze. If we could flip a coin for who we would draft at 6, then guess what? Trading back to 12, grabbing multiple extra picks and still getting Odunze, that would be found money for the Giants. So how the combine plays out here is going to shuffle the deck a little bit. I find it fascinating to see like where Joe Schoen spots that value, because we had a couple of people say, no one talks enough about the Giants potentially trading down because the assumption is there's too much talent there. And I think it's a reality. Like, what's the furthest thing away from every word that's been spoken out of Joe Schoen's mouth, which maybe tells you what they're thinking about doing or considering? They haven't even mentioned trading back. They haven't even mentioned about stockpiling draft assets. That's always a fun one to watch.
Adam, it's interesting because the way that I'm looking at this, at the end of the day, at the combine and at the draft level, all of this stuff is all smoke and mirrors. You're hearing reports the Giants are asking the top 3 teams what it would take to move to get a quarterback. The Giants are interviewing every single quarterback under the sun. The Giants are are really excited to move up, and if they can get a quarterback, they will. It's like,
Right.
do you really think if that was the case that you would be hearing about this? Why haven't you heard a single thing about the Giants talking about a wide receiver? Why haven't you heard
Right.
a single thing about how they would love to meet with Malik Neighbors? Like, you're not hearing a single thing about the Giants taking a wide receiver, because I believe that is the path that they will probably end up taking. They want other teams to think the Giants are moving up to 3 to get a quarterback so that they spend draft capital to move up and get a quarterback, which means the best player available falls to the Giants. To me, the more I keep hearing about the type of wide receivers they want, aggressive, tenacity, strong, like Roman Dunze is one of those guys that checks the box in terms of like, he's going to fight for every single yard. And it feels like that's the type of receiver that Joe Shane and Dayball want. Like,
Mhm.
the more I'm hearing them talk and you kind of picture in your mind which wide receiver that is, the more Roman Dunze is the guy. And I'm curious, maybe they stick at 6 and take him. Maybe they drop back 2 spots for someone that wants a quarterback and they take him. But he is a guy that is starting to emerge without them even mentioning his name once.
Yeah, he's a player that, again, now take this with what it's intended, because I was a massive fan of Jonathan Mingo coming out of the draft, coming out of Old Miss. Now, he was a later, second round pick, 39th overall. He came in his rookie campaign, 43 receptions on 85 targets, 418, 9.7. But what I loved about him was the physical traits, the aggressiveness, right? And Odunze is next level version of that. So to your point, like, you need one of those guys. We like a lot of players the Giants have right now in the wide receiver room, certainly, but you need kind of a little bit of a bulldog that can play physically and go get you those critical yards. Odunze seems to profile that way, so we'll keep an eye on him. Here's what you do. I mentioned that we're going to be getting DBs today at the Combine. Kicks off at 3 p.m. We're also going to get not linebackers, tight ends. So it'll be fun to take a look at that. The defensive back room matters here for the Giants. Second round into the third round. When are you going to find someone to pair with Banks, obviously across from him there on the defensive side of the football? So going to be a lot of fun to check that out. You can go over to onegiantpodcast.com. I'm posting up the article feeds as we work our way through it. I'll be trying to get an article out ahead of today's Combine for a couple of more names to watch. And then looking back to yesterday, I'm going to pull out those names that surprise me, guys that are moving up the board, and talk about potentially where they can fit for Big Blue. So get over to One Giant Podcast, get over to Substack, search for yours truly, Adam Armbrecht. Get us over on the podcast feed as well at AndyMac214 on Twitter, at Adam Armbrecht on Twitter, and at One Giant Podcast on, yes, Twitter. Until next time, though, whoo, baby, it's my favorite time of year, short of the draft, short of the regular season, short of the playoffs. It's still a lot of fun, as Andrew Mackwitz would want, need, nay, demand that people know.
As always, let's go Big Blue.